And then the other half, if I've cheated anybody, I'm paying him back 4 times what I owe. And the story concludes by Jesus saying, today salvation has come to this man's house, and he is a son of Abraham. So he includes one who had been ethnically or racially excluded. Gender reversal. There's no way that we can credit Jesus for being the greatest women's liberator of all time. To make such statements is hyperbole in the least. But given his status and his setting in time, culture, history, religion, he's remarkably pro-woman, actually, in many, many instances. 2 or 3. It was the Syrophoenician woman whom he said, in whom he saw the greatest faith he'd ever seen. He says, no man in Israel ever showed me this kind of faith. But there's another one that's very interesting. Again, it's also from the Gospel of Luke. It's found at about the beginning of the 8th chapter. I don't know if you've ever wondered, but I used to wonder, since Jesus never worked, and since the apostles gave up fishing and gave up tax collecting and gave up business, how in the world did these guys survive? Luke gives the answer. He names 3 women who were women of resources who paid Jesus' bills. And one of them he identifies as a married woman. Now, get this in the modern world. So here's Jesus. He gets a bunch of these guys to follow him. They give up working, fishing, tax collecting, carpentry, and they wander around. And there's a group of women, at least one of whom is married to someone else, who follows them everywhere and pays all their bills. It's very fascinating. It's found only in Luke, which is the most emphatic in these role reversals. There is more than once in John's Gospel private conversation between Jesus and a woman. In John 4, he's having a conversation with a Samaritan woman. There's a double liability there socially. And his disciples wander up upon it and they're stunned. It's women who are at the foot of Jesus' cross when he dies. It's women to whom he first appears in the resurrection accounts. There is certainly gender reversal. However, I would not make as much of it as some have. There's a tendency, and either extreme is wrong, there's a tendency to sort of beat Jesus into the ground as backward and incompetent, and there's clearly some genius there that we should recognize. But then there's also this tendency that he's the greatest of liberators that there ever was, and that would be hyperbole. I think what we could say is, given his time and place and setting, he was remarkable. The bumper sticker had it right. He was a liberal Jew. But the most interesting to me is Jesus' ethic in regard to the religious, and so I put this in quotation marks. We misread the Gospels because we read them often through the wrong lens. A lot of times, unfortunately, my students who read the Gospels seriously, or think they do, read them so because of church or Sunday school or youth meetings or whatever, and they often pick up Bibles and have the idea, for example, that the apostles were a group of, say, priests and clergymen. After all, St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, St. John. I have 2 points about that. Number one, those terms saints are never in the text itself. In fact, the word saint never occurs in the singular in the Greek New Testament, ever. It only occurs in the plural. There's no individual saint, there's only communities of separated people. But secondly, none of the apostles were clergy. Jesus picked the tax collector, carpenters, a series of fishermen, some we don't know what they did, but nobody's ever identified as a priest or a Pharisee or a Sadducee or a Levite. Not in the least. And unquestionably, in both the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of John, Jesus' most harsh denunciations are reserved for religious hypocrites. in Matthew's Gospel, there are two great ones. This comes, around the 22nd or so chapter. I have to review the text, but I can tell you plainly it says two things. Jesus gets in an argument with the religious leaders of his day, and he says, you know, you guys remind me of beautiful whitewashed graves. On the outside, you're painted and beautiful, but inside you smell like rotten bones. And he says specifically, and the worst of you are the Pharisees, who were regarded as the greatest religious people of their day. In fact, Jesus, earlier in the same gospel, challenges his followers to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. But he then turns around 15 chapters later and says, you Pharisees, you crisscross the earth in a checkerboard pattern. It's an interesting Greek construction where you don't miss a square inch. You crisscross the earth to find one person and make him a convert. And when you find this person and you turn him into a Pharisee, he's twice the son of hell he was before you found him. That's extremely. By the way, there is only, Jesus is constantly talking about Peter, put away the sword, turn the other cheek, go 2 miles instead of just one, give things away, let people curse you. The only example of Jesus exhibiting anything that we would call violence, as recorded, is his making the cord of whips and throwing the money changers out of the temple. It's the only exhibition of violence in the life of Jesus, and it's directed toward religious hypocrites. There is in John chapter 8 an outstanding confrontation between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day. And they raise question about his suspicious birth. They say, we know who our parents are. We don't know who your parents are. God is our father. We come from Abraham. We come from Moses. But we don't even know where you're from or who your father is. And Jesus says, I know who your father is, and it's not Abraham or Moses. Your father is the devil. John 8, and they pick up stones to kill him. Except John says he miraculously slips through their midst. The ethic of Jesus is extremely his most harsh denunciation, his most embittered confrontations, and his only display of violence is in response to religious hypocrisy that he finds so terribly disdainful. In short, he saw himself as the harbinger of a new age, a new way of thinking, a new way of living, where the old passed away, the new has come. He said it's kind of like trying to put new wine in old wineskins. The old wineskins will burst, you lose the wine, you just need a whole new wineskin. You need a whole new system, you need a whole new reversal, you need an entirely new ethic where it moves from external to internal, from law to love, and there's a radical reversal that shows its consequences in all of these areas. And I'm rather excited that some students from a variety of settings are studying and grasping and picking up some of these details, because in my own experience for the last 31 years, generally, the last people to really see this are the church people. Sometimes in speaking on Jesus, you almost inherently upset secular people, which is not my intent, and you almost inherently upset church people. That's not my major intent. My goal in putting this together is trying to say in less than 1 hour, survey the most poignant texts that we have and pull together sort of an overview of the ethic of Jesus.